I'm Rave, and this is the Stry-strike Mark II. This was another commission NERF mod, which just means that all of the modifications and the paint job and everything were done to the specific specifications of a client who paid me to do this for them. What the Stry-strike is a modified NERF Longstrike shell that has been cut up in different places in order to accept all of the functioning components of a NERF Stryfe. I'll go over some of the external shell work that had to be done as well as the internal components of the Stryfe that I integrated, then move on to the paint job and show you the blaster in action. First thing I had to do to the Longstrike was empty it out of not only all of its functioning parts, but to also hollow out the shell, and I did this with a rotary tool and just started cutting away all of the excess plastic. I also cut into the front of the shell as well as a wider gap where the magazine well used to be. I then integrated some of the external components of the Stryfe, namely the Stryfe's magazine well and the Stryfe's front muzzle piece and tactical rail. I did leave the Longstrike's access door in place so that it covers up this gap in the shell. The trigger is also that of the Longstrike, however I did have to cut down and modify it quite a bit in order for it to be compatible with all of the Stryfe components on the inside. The rev trigger is that of the Stryfe, and I had to cut a small hole in the Longstrike handle in order for that to come through. The most notable improvement on this Stry-strike versus my Mark I prototype was the way that I integrated the Stryfe muzzle piece. Normally on a Stryfe, when you attach a barrel extension, there's some extra room on the muzzle for the barrel to wobble back and forth. So I remedied that in this build by leaving more of the Longstrike shell intact and placing the entire muzzle piece a little bit farther back so that when you attach barrels, the end of the barrel extension is flush with the shell of the Longstrike, and so there is literally zero room for it to wobble back and forth, and attaching barrels is just much more stable than not only my last Stry-strike, but most other flywheel blasters in general. I added some more hardware to the integration also for some added stability. I have a 2-inch machine screw going from one end of the shell through the muzzle piece and then out the other end with a nut securing that. And then I have some epoxy putty on the inside of the shell, just creating a big glob for a screw to go into, and then I have a screw going through the tactical rail of the Stryfe into that glob of epoxy putty, which if you've worked with epoxy putty before, you know it's basically like clay in its uncured form, but once you mix it together and put it on something, it hardens to a rock-like substance that you're then able to drill into and sand. The screw is far back enough on the tactical rail that attachments can still go on and it doesn't interfere, but it adds a whole lot of stability to the integration and keeps the rail from moving back and forth when you're holding something like a foregrip or a bipod. These particular attachments aren't part of this project, they were just what I had laying around to demonstrate the improvements that I made to the integration. The Longstrike shell is completely overhauled on the inside. In terms of the Stryfe, I have removed all of the electronic locks and just the extra switches that make it so you can't rev the blaster when the access door is open or there's no magazine, stuff like that. The most major modification was replacing the stock Stryfe motors with Solarbotics RM2 motors. These motors are really cool because they're made to spin at very fast RPMs on relatively low voltage. That means you can still get the same great performance as you would running the stock motors with 12 to 16 volt ultrafire batteries or IMRs, but running standard AA batteries with RM2 motors, they spin at just the same speed, but you don't have to buy expensive batteries and chargers to get that performance. I am running the motors off of 4 AA batteries, which are housed here in a 4x AA battery holder, which is just screwed onto the side of the shell here, so that from this side you can't see that there's a battery tray integrated, and the whole thing pretty much still looks like a Longstrike from the outside. Along with a regular unmodified 6-round magazine, the client also requested that I include a invisible magazine that is just a modified 6-round magazine where you cut off the last inch of the magazine and then cover the remaining gap with a piece of sheet plastic. This way you can be super sneaky ninja and put this into your blaster and still fire off 5 or 6 darts, but no one can see that you have a magazine inserted, so they assume that you just don't have any ammo loaded. Moving on to the paint job, The client wanted an overall Canadian flag theme for the whole blaster, so I started off with a black vinyl dye primer coat, as always, just to give all the paint something to stick to. And then for a base coat, I did a gloss white vinyl dye, and then went over that with red Citadel brush paint. I believe the exact color is Mephiston red. So sketched on a maple leaf on either side of the blaster with pencil, then painted in the inside with the red Citadel paint, and then painted the inside red, outlined it in Sharpie, and erased the pencil lines. I also did some custom lettering with a fine tip Sharpie. We named the blaster the Canadian Trooper CS6. I also went over some of the really cool details in the Longstrike shell that I felt were kind of getting lost in a sea of white with the fine tip Sharpie, and just sort of highlighted the things in the shell that I thought were really cool. I also felt that the orange parts on the blaster were clashing with the overall color scheme, and so I painted those with a charcoal gray vinyl dye, along with the back of the Longstrike stock, just to balance out the overall amount of gray that there was on the blaster. I finished everything off with a gloss Duplicolor wheel clear coat. This is the clear coat that's normally used for the hubcaps on cars, and so it's extremely weather and chemical resistant, and overall just gives a very smooth and shiny finish to the whole blaster. I think overall it turned out really nice. It looks great, it feels great, and it's just overall really, really fun to use. Last but not least, I'll show you a demonstration of the blaster firing. And of course, red and white darts, because Canadian awesomeness. Yeah. Oh dear, I think I broke the lens. That wraps up the video overview of the Canadian Trooper Stry-strike Mark II. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay updated on all my future projects. And if you want a custom blaster done of your own, send an email to ravetrooper21@gmail.com. As always, happy nerfing, and I'll see you next time.